Frances told me a few years later that she was sort of thrilled at the way that Diana sort of freed herself, as she saw it, from the shackles of royalty and from being a member of the royal family and striking out on her own.
The DNA revealed about Princess Diana's mother's ancestry is genuinely one of the strangest findings in modern genetics. When scientists tested saliva from two of Diana's maternal relatives, they expected to confirm what everyone already believed: old centuries of pure aristocratic English blood. What they actually found was a DNA marker so rare that only 14 people on the entire planet carry it. 13 live in India, 1 lives in Nepal, 0 live in Europe. And somehow that exact same ancient genetic signature was sitting inside the family tree of Britain's most famous princess. It traces straight back to a single woman born around 1790 in a port city on India's western coast. A woman the Spencer family spent over 200 years desperately trying to erase. After having her children, she then devoted herself to royal service. She became one of the Queen Mother's women of the bedchamber. Every genealogy was rewritten. Every biography was sanitized. But DNA doesn't forget. And what it exposed about Princess Diana's mother's bloodline is something the most powerful family in Britain never wanted anyone to find out: the DNA discovery. It started with 2 small vials of saliva arriving at a genetics lab in Edinburgh, Scotland. The year was 2013. The samples came from 2 women directly descended from Princess Diana's maternal line, both third cousins of Diana's mother, Frances Shand Kydd. These weren't random volunteers pulled off the street. They were specifically chosen because they shared something extraordinary: an unbroken mother-to-daughter connection stretching back over 200 years. Dr. Jim Wilson and his team at the University of Edinburgh, working alongside the genetic ancestry company Britain's DNA, began their analysis, and they focused on one very specific type of genetic material: mitochondrial DNA. Now, most people have never heard of mitochondrial DNA, so here's why it matters. Unlike the rest of your DNA, which gets shuffled and recombined every single time 2 parents create a child, mitochondrial DNA doesn't mix at all. It doesn't change. It doesn't blend with the father's genetics. It passes completely intact from mother to daughter, generation after generation, like a sealed letter that nobody can open or edit along the way. Think about that for a second. That means if your mother's 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 mother carried a specific genetic marker 1,000 years ago, you could still carry the exact same one today. It's a time capsule, a silent witness. An unbroken chain reaching all the way back through the centuries, completely untouched by any man who ever entered the family. The team used a specialized chip to scan hundreds of markers along the mitochondrial genome. It was supposed to be a routine ancestry test. Another aristocratic bloodline confirmed, another footnote in English history. But when the results came back, Dr. Wilson didn't see what he expected. He saw something that made him stop and run the analysis again, and then run it a 3rd time. He later described that moment to the press. The sheer disbelief of staring at a genetic marker that had no business appearing in a British royal family. A marker that in his entire career studying population genetics, he had only ever associated with one region on Earth. The samples belong to haplogroup R30b. Out of more than 65,000 people in their worldwide genetic database, only 14 carried this exact marker. 13 of them lived in India. 1 lived in Nepal. Nobody in Europe had ever shown up with it. Nobody in Africa. Nobody in the Americas. And now, this same ancient South Asian signature had just appeared in the bloodline of the most photographed woman in British history. Here's the catch. The R30b haplogroup, along with its closely related branches, R30 and R30a, are entirely South Asian in origin. There's no ambiguity. There's no alternative explanation. Doctor. Wilson later told the press the evidence was unassailable. This wasn't a statistical fluke or some contaminated sample. It was a clear, undeniable scientific trail confirmed independently by matching DNA from two separate living relatives who didn't even know each other. The presence of R30 billion meant one thing. Somewhere around 7 generations before Princess Diana, a woman with South Asian ancestry had entered her direct maternal line. Not a distant cousin, not a minor branch, the direct line, mother to daughter to daughter to daughter, all the way to Diana herself. And that meant the official Spencer family history, the one printed in every genealogy book, every royal biography, every wedding program, was missing an entire chapter. The search turned from the laboratory to the archives. If the DNA was right, then someone real had been deliberately written out of the story, someone whose blood still flowed through the veins of princes. The question became, who was she? And why had she been hidden for 200 years? If you're the kind of person who believes science should expose what powerful families try to bury, hit subscribe right now because this story is just getting started. Eliza Kewark, the woman they erased. Her name was Eliza Kewark, and for over 2 centuries, almost nobody knew she existed. Her name didn't appear in the official Spencer genealogies. It wasn't mentioned in any royal biography. If you search the family records that were available to the public before 2013, you would find no trace of her. She was born around 1790 in Surat, a bustling port city on India's western coast in what is now the state of Gujarat. In those days, Surat was one of India's great commercial crossroads, a place where merchant ships from a dozen nations crowded the harbor, Jammu, where traders shouted in a patchwork of languages, where goods and people and cultures collided in the narrow streets every single day. It was the kind of place where a woman of mixed heritage could exist without drawing too much attention. Eliza's father carried the Armenian name Kivor, and she signed her own letters in Armenian script. That detail would later become the family's most useful lie, but her mother's line, the one that carried the rare R30 billion mitochondrial marker, was South Asian. In colonial India, mixed heritage was common in port cities like Surat. Armenian merchants had lived there for generations, intermarrying with local families. But in the rigid social hierarchy of the British Empire, that kind of background came with serious risks. Now, here's where the story turns. As a young woman, Eliza became the companion of Theodore Forbes, a Scottish merchant who arrived in Surat around 1809 to work for the East India Company. Forbes was the younger son of a landowning family from Bowley in Aberdeen, ambitious, sharp, and determined to build a career in the empire's most lucrative outpost. He employed Eliza as his housekeeper, but the reality of their relationship went far deeper than any job title. Together, Eliza and Theodore had 2 children, a daughter named Catherine, born in 1812, and a son named Alexander, born 2 years later. For a time, the family lived together, first in Surat and then in Mocha, Yemen, where Theodore was appointed British political resident. His job was to buy coffee for the East India Company and monitor shipping at the entrance to the Red Sea. Letters from this period show that Eliza was more than a domestic servant. Theodore relied on her multilingual abilities. She was an asset to his diplomatic work. By every private measure, they were a family. But here's the deal. As Theodore's career advanced and he accepted a prestigious partnership back in Bombay, as the social realities of British India closed in around them like a trap. In the drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs of colonial Bombay, a wife with Indian blood wasn't just frowned upon. She was a career-ending liability. The days when mixed marriages in India were tolerated, even encouraged, were rapidly ending. A new era of racial segregation was setting in. Theodore made this devastating choice. He left Eliza and the children behind in Surat. He moved to Bombay alone. And while he lodged with friends and attended society parties, Eliza and her children lived separately, cut off from the world he was building without them. And then something happened that still haunts this story 2 centuries later. Years after Theodore's death, a packet of letters written in a non-European script was discovered at the Forbes family estate at Bowley in Scotland. They had been sitting there for decades, untouched, unread, gathering dust in a drawer. When scholars finally examined them, they realized what they were holding. The letters were from Eliza, written in broken English, dictated to a Parsi scribe because her written English wasn't strong enough, and signed in her own hand in Armenian script. Letter after letter after letter, spanning years, all carrying the same desperate plea to be allowed to see her daughter one last time before Catherine was sent away to Europe. Forever in one letter she wrote, "My good sir, I pray you, let me know by your leave, I will bring my child to give in your hand by myself." Read that again slowly. A mother asking permission to hand her own daughter over, knowing that once she did, she would never see that child again, knowing that an empire stood between them. And still, she offered to make the journey herself, just to hold Catherine one last time, and nobody said a word. When Theodore died at sea in 1820, everything collapsed. His will described Eliza only as his housekeeper. He called Catherine his reputed natural daughter. The language was surgical, every word chosen to sever any legal or social connection between Eliza and the family she had built. Catherine, just 8 years old, was put on a ship bound for Scotland, accompanied only by a servant named Fazagul. She sailed to a cold country she had never seen to live with relatives she had never met. She never saw her mother again. Young Alexander, her brother, made it to Scotland too. But he was so homesick, so miserable that he was eventually sent back to Surat to be with Eliza. Catherine stayed. She grew up among the Forbes family. She adapted. And in time, she married well. But wait, it gets worse. Because through Catherine, this hidden bloodline didn't just survive, it thrived. Catherine gave birth to a daughter. That daughter had a daughter. And on it went, generation after generation, until the line produced Ruth, then Frances, then a girl born on the 1st of July, 1961 at Park House on the Sandringham estate. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. 7 generations from a port city in India to the most famous wedding in television history. And nobody in the family ever told the truth about where that bloodline actually began. But the silence wasn't accidental. It was engineered. And the cover-up that followed was one of the most thorough acts of genealogical erasure in British aristocratic history. The 2-century cover-up. Victorian Britain didn't just care about pedigree, it worshipped it. For families like the Spencers, climbing the highest rungs of English society, any whisper of non-European ancestry wasn't just embarrassing, it was existential. Had it been widely known that Catherine Forbes and her descendants carried Indian blood, they might never have made the marriages that secured their place in the aristocracy. And every generation that followed would have been tainted by what the Victorians called colored blood. So the family did what powerful families have always done. They rewrote history. Eliza's name, Kawark, was close enough to the Armenian name Kivor. She signed letters in Armenian script. Her father may genuinely have had Armenian roots, and that single thread became the entire official story. Armenian meant Christian, Armenian meant respectable, Armenian meant safely exotic, a quirk of the empire, nothing more. Indian heritage, on the other hand, would have been treated as a permanent stain that no amount of money or marriage could wash away. And get this, the cover-up didn't just last a generation. It lasted over 200 years. Genealogies published in the 19th century told only the Armenian version. Family trees, marriage registers, church records, and private correspondence. All of it carefully scrubbed of any mention of India or mixed heritage. By the 20th century, the lie was so deeply embedded that no one alive even questioned it. When Diana married Prince Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981 in front of 750 million television viewers, the official biographies still described Eliza Kawark as Armenian. Nobody in the Spencer family challenged it. Nobody in the royal household challenged it. The secret held. It held through 2 world wars. It held through the collapse of the British Empire. It held through the most watched wedding in human history until 2013, when 2 vials of saliva blew it wide open. Now, here's where it gets personal. After the DNA results were published, reporters tracked down Diana's maternal aunt, a woman named Mary Roach. She was one of the few living people who had grown up hearing the old family stories, the ones passed down at dinner tables and in private letters for generations. When they told her what the DNA had revealed, she paused, and then she said something that captures the absurdity of 2 centuries of deception in a single sentence. I always assumed that I was part Armenian, so I am delighted that I also have an Indian background. Think about that for a second. A woman in Princess Diana's own family had lived her entire life believing a story that was genetically false. She didn't know. Her mother didn't know. Her grandmother didn't know. The lie had been so complete, so thoroughly maintained across so many generations that even the people carrying the DNA had no idea what it actually was. The real story had been written in their cells the entire time. It just took science to finally read it. More royal than the royals. But the hidden Indian ancestry was only one layer of a family story that gets stranger the deeper you dig. Because the Spencers weren't just any aristocratic family. They were, by some measures, more royal than the royals themselves. And here's what most people don't realize. Royal blood in Diana's family didn't flow through official marriages or grand alliances. It came from the wrong side of the sheets, through mistresses. Barbara Villiers, Louise de Kerouaille, and Nell Gwyn each held the affections of King Charles II, a monarch famous for siring more than a dozen children with women who would never become queen. The Spencer family traces its lineage through not 1, not 2, but 3 of these royal mistresses. Their children were born outside the rules of succession, but their bloodline quietly wove its way into the English aristocracy across centuries. Diana descended from Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, and Charles Lennox, Duke of Richmond, both illegitimate sons of Charles II. 11 generations back, she was also a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, executed in 1587 by her cousin Elizabeth I. Meanwhile, the Spencer estate at Althorpe had stood since 1508, outlasting wars, dynasties, and the rise and fall of monarchs. The royal family's own name, by contrast, was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, thoroughly German until King George V quietly renamed them Windsor during the First World War to avoid anti-German backlash. And here's the killer irony. When Diana's engagement to Prince Charles was announced in 1981, the editors of Burke's Peerage, the definitive record of British aristocracy, made a public statement that stunned even the royal household. They declared that Lady Diana Spencer had more English royal blood running through her veins than her future husband. The Spencers, they said, were stiff with royal connections. By the oldest reckoning, Diana wasn't marrying up. Charles was marrying a woman whose family had spent 2 centuries hiding her Indian ancestor turned out to be more royal than the prince she was marrying. Yet the Spencers had guarded their secret so fiercely for so long that by the time Diana walked down the aisle, the irony was invisible to everyone in that cathedral. The family that had erased a woman from India to protect their bloodline had produced the most consequential bride in modern royal history. And still nobody told the truth, not until the DNA spoke for itself. The line ends. This is where the story closes, and it closes hard. Prince William carries the same rare R30 billion mitochondrial marker that started in Gujarat over 200 years ago. It passed through Eliza Kawark, crossed oceans, survived colonial prejudice, outlasted 2 centuries of deliberate erasure, and landed in the DNA of the man who will one day sit on the British throne. The autosomal markers across the genomes of Diana's 2 maternal cousins confirm they carried between 0.3 and 0.8% South Asian ancestry, meaning William himself almost certainly carries a small but real portion of Indian DNA inherited from Eliza. He will be the first British monarch with proven Indian ancestry. The Commonwealth, home to over 1 billion people of South Asian descent, will one day be led by a king with a direct genetic link to their region. That's not symbolism. That's not a diplomatic gesture. That's biology written into the cells of a man who will wear the crown. But here's the final twist. And this one doesn't have a happy ending. Mitochondrial DNA flows only from mother to child. Men carry it, but they cannot pass it on. William inherited the R30 billion marker from Diana, but his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, will not inherit it from him. The marker dies with William and his brother Harry. The ancient genetic thread that traveled from a port city in western India through 7 generations of English women across continents and centuries of silence all the way to the steps of Buckingham Palace. That thread ends here. Eliza Kawark was erased from the family records. Her letters gathered dust in a Scottish archive for nearly 200 years. Her name was replaced with a convenient lie. Her heritage was scrubbed from every document the family could reach. And now, the last biological trace of her existence is fading from the royal bloodline forever. She fought to see her daughter one last time. They wouldn't let her. They buried her name. They rewrote her story. They turned her into someone she wasn't. And now, 200 years later, even her DNA, the last whisper of proof that she ever existed in this bloodline, will be gone. Eliza Kawark lost everything. And the final thing she had left to give, her genetic signature. The world is about to lose too. The Spencers spent 200 years hiding this woman. What else do you think the world's most powerful families are still keeping buried? If you want to find out, subscribe now, because the stories they don't want you to hear are always the ones most worth telling.